I spent $1,200 on an Uber ride from Atlanta to Connecticut. And before you think I'm absolutely insane, which I guess the jury's still out on that, it was actually leading to the greatest sale that I've ever made. And in this video, I'm going to share with you that entire story, why I spent $1,200 on an Uber, and ultimately how it led to the best ROI I've ever gotten on any investment. As an entrepreneur, sometimes it's difficult to have context as to what does it really take to get a result that you're after as an entrepreneur, whether it's making a sale, making a wise investment, or any other decision in the process. It can be difficult to understand what is really required to get the result. So I'm hoping that this story that I'm about to share with you illustrates sometimes what it takes to get the result that you're after. And for those of you who don't know me, my name is John Whiting. I've built 2 7-figure businesses and sold one of them in 2019. And I've worked with over 3,000 entrepreneurs from all around the world to help them get out of their own way, beat procrastination, self-sabotage, fear, doubt, frustration, and become a bulletproof entrepreneur. And as I said, in this video, I'm about to share with you the story of how I got the greatest return on investment on a $1,200 Uber ride halfway across the United States. And interestingly, this sale had nothing to do with my business. So let me give you a little bit of a backstory. My current, as of the recording of this, fiance, and we're actually getting married this coming Saturday. So by the time you're actually watching this, I will actually be married, and this is a huge part of this story. In fact, it is almost the entire story as to the biggest sale that I've ever made. So a little bit of a backstory. My fiance, Melissa, and I dated for a couple of years back in 2009, 2010, when I was like 20, 21 years old, and pretty much an idiot across the board in just about every area of life. Long story short, I did what any irresponsible 20 or 21-year-old would do with a great person in their life. I got rid of her, and I did it in a way that I definitely would not recommend or that I would do again. But as a young, dumb guy, I basically kind of screwed up. Long story short, when I say kind of screwed up, I mean like really screwed up. And so that led to obviously her disliking me an immense amount, not talking to me, her family disliking me an immense amount, pretty much wanting to wring my neck. And so I had pretty much written that entire relationship off at that point. And of course, I thought that that was the right thing to do. And for a good solid 6 years, I kind of went off about my business and did pretty much what any average mid-20s guy would do, is kind of go out and think that he's the man and basically screw up in every area of life, relationships, business, and you name it. And so as some of you know, if you've been following me, in 2016, I started working with, actually 2015, I started working with a gentleman that had really helped me get out of my own way in pretty much every area of life, and the direct relation that has had on my business. Basically, up until about 2015, 2016, I had never made more than like $20,000 in a year, and I could really just not get out of my own way. And in the link in the comments, actually, there's a link to a masterclass. It's a totally free masterclass where I walk you through essentially the shifts that I was walked through that really was the difference that made the difference for me, helping me get out of my own way. And ultimately, since the time that I went through the processes that I'm about to share with you in the masterclass and the links below, I went from never making more than like 20 grand in a year to multiple millions of dollars in the last few years. But one of the byproducts of that was getting crystal clarity on what I wanted out of a relationship. At the time, I was kind of having clarity on a lot of things, business-wise, personally, and relationally. And I said, you know what? The person that I really want to be with is Melissa. And I just like made that decision. Now, I also knew that her dad probably wanted to take a baseball bat to my face, and pretty much every other member of her inner circle or friends and family probably wanted to murder me. So I knew that it was going to be an uphill climb. At the time, I was living in Los Angeles, and she was living in Connecticut, and we hadn't spoken in like 7 years. So this was going to be quite an uphill battle. So a number of series of events occurred to where I had reached out to her, and somehow she answered via text, and we began slowly but surely talking again. And I knew that she had been recently single, and so that was kind of my opening. And so fast forward, and this was in 2017, so about October 2017. So kind of very gingerly testing the waters of, at least I was engaging in a conversation with this person that I was just like, I'm sure that you're the one that I'm going to be with. Slowly but surely started regaining a bit of rapport with her. Meanwhile, still understanding that everybody in her life would think that she's a moron and that I'm a horrible person, and, really want to make sure that I had paid for the mistakes that I've made. And so first of all, I was willing to accept whatever that meant. I was pretty much at that point willing to do whatever it took. And this story is really kind of the climax of that story. And so along the way that we're talking, she was kind of like, yeah, whatever, not really taking me that seriously. And I can't blame her. I was shocked that she even was responding to anything that I was saying. So we kind of fast forward, we got to a point to where she was open to potentially seeing me. And it was like, yeah, whatever, dude, we'll see what happens. And we'll see if you actually make plans, because you're full of you know what. And so I was like, all right, like I knew that was the scenario. And so ultimately I booked a flight. At the time I was visiting my family in Florida, which is now where I live. And I had booked a flight to Connecticut. And I was going to go to Connecticut, see her, and then fly back to LA. And I was actually in the process of moving out of LA at the time. So I was kind of bouncing all over the place. But I knew for sure that I wanted to go and see her. And so I booked this flight from Tampa through Atlanta to Los Angeles it was the weekend of like December 5th, 6th, and 7th or something like that. Here it comes. I'm going to make this flight, and the time approaches, and I was supposed to go from like 8 a.m. to 11 a.m. to Atlanta, and then 11:30 to like 1:30. And I was going to be in Connecticut at like 1:30 on a Friday. And so land in Atlanta, super smooth. Text her, I'm like, hey, I'm in Atlanta. Next flight leaves in 30 minutes. And meanwhile, it's the biggest snowstorm that you've ever seen in Atlanta. And they were very unprepared for it. And I was like, God, I hope I'm able to get out of here. And so that flight was delayed. And then it was canceled. And then I was bumped to the next one that left in 2 hours. And then that one was delayed, and then it was canceled. Then I was bumped into the next one. Now it's like 3:30, and I'm sitting at a bar up in the Atlanta airport, basically texting Melissa like, hey, it's the next one, it's the next one, it's the next one. Meanwhile, she's just like, oh, so you're full of it, you're full of it, you're full of it, you're full of it. And so I was like, man, this needs to happen. Like there's no kind of not getting there. I'm just like, I don't know how it was going to happen. But still at that time, I was on the next flight out. And then that next flight out got canceled. And that next flight out got canceled. Finally, we fast forward all the way to 8:30 p.m. Keep in mind, I've been in Atlanta since 11 a.m. So literally almost 9 hours. Actually, 9.5 hours of sitting in the Atlanta airport waiting for the next flight. And so the plane is at the gate. The pilots are at the gate, and it says it's on time, ready to go. And it's going to go boarding starts at 8:20, and it's now 8:15. At like 8:18, they come over the loudspeaker system and say, I'm sorry, the flight has been canceled, and there's not another one out until tomorrow. And I was immediately very upset. And I basically stormed down to the rental car lot because I'm like, whatever, I'm driving. I don't care. I'm driving. And so I, of course, wasn't the only genius that had that idea, as people had been getting one-way rental cars since about 9 a.m. that day, and they were all gone by 9 p.m. on Friday night. Keep in mind, I was supposed to be in Connecticut 8 hours earlier. So I started asking people, are you headed north? People who are getting one-way rental cars. I'm like, I will pay for your entire rental car. And to keep it in mind, at this time, I was not making a lot of money at all. But I was just like, whatever, I'm not getting to Connecticut. So I'm going. And so nobody's heading north. And I'm like, damn. And it is snowing like crazy outside. So I'm like, man, this is a tough situation. So I start thinking, I wonder if I can like walk to a truck stop. Like how can I make this happen? So I get up my phone and I'm like, let's take a risk. So I put the Connecticut airport address in Uber and I hit order ride or whatever the button is. And somebody accepts the ride. And I'm like, okay. Now come to find out later that Uber does not tell you where you're going. Apparently, as a driver, it didn't at the time. It doesn't tell you where you're going. It just says, hey, here's a ride, and somebody accepted it. So the dude calls me. Keep in mind, 9 o'clock at night, worst snowstorm Atlanta's like ever seen. And I need to get to Connecticut, and there's no flights. And by the way, there's no hotel rooms either. So I'm like, this is bad. So this dude calls, says, hey, did you request a ride? I said, yeah. He's like, where you headed? I said, so don't hang up. Connecticut. He's like, Connecticut? And I'm like, yeah. He's like, up near New York, Connecticut? And I'm like, yeah, that's the one. He's like, oh man, that's a long way. And so to give you an idea of who this gentleman was, if you've ever seen the show Rob and Big back on MTV like 10 years ago, and Big, forget his actual name, but it's called Big Black on the show, and basically like 400-pound, like huge dude. And so if you have not seen them, just Google that, or maybe I'll flash an image on the screen here. Anywho, that's who basically was calling me. And I was like, all right, so we're going to Connecticut. He's like, oh man, that's a long way. I'm like, yeah, I'm aware. And so I kind of shared with him a baby version of the story that I'm sharing with you. And I'm like, I promise you I will make it 100% worth your while. Just we'll make it work. I need to be in Connecticut, and I just made up a time. I was like, I need to be in Connecticut by 10 a.m. tomorrow. It's like life critical. And I would just like emphasize the importance like heck. And he's like, I don't know. I'm like, look, just show up. I will promise you I'm going to make this worth your while. So he shows up in this Dodge Caravan, like it was white Dodge Caravan. And I don't even have a coat because my coat is in my checked luggage. And I'm literally in like a sweatshirt barely, and it's freezing and it's snowing. So I run out there. All I have is my backpack on me and had like my laptop and whatever in it. And so I get in, and it's this dude in this van named Will. I'll keep his last name hidden just for security purposes. Anyway, and Will's like, hey man, that's a long way to Connecticut. I'm like, I know, but throw out a number. Whatever the number is, just throw it out. And he's like, I don't know. So in negotiation, you always have the other guy put out the number first. So I was trying to get a number, see where he was at. And he's like, well, I don't know. I've been to Orlando from Atlanta, and that was like $800 or something like that through Uber, or maybe it was more than that. I don't quite recall. But he threw out some like crazy number. In fact, it was probably like $2,000 or $3,000 from Atlanta to Orlando. And I'm just like, being reasonable, like, what's the number? He just wouldn't give me a number. I'm like, all right, I'll tell you what. Let's do $1,200, and then I'll pay you $600 right now, and I'll pay you $600 when we get there, and we start driving like literally right now, and we go. Like I gotta get there by 10 a.m. tomorrow, and by this point it's like 9:30 at night, and so he's like, I don't know, man. It's a long way. I was like, bro, when was the last time that you made $1,200 in one day? He's like, oh man, it's been a minute. So I was like, all right, so like, how do we make this happen? He's like, well, I got to call my sister Tisha. So I was like, all right, whatever. So he gets on the phone with Tisha on speaker. He's like, hey, I got a fare who wants to go to Connecticut. She's like, Connecticut? He said, yeah. She said, you mean up by New York, Connecticut? He said, yeah. He said, how much he want? He said, $1,200. She said, hell yeah, we going to Connecticut. So we get I'm like, all right, whatever, we're doing this. So I PayPal'd him at the time $600 right then and there. And we drove in Atlanta with some random dude that I've never met in my entire life in some random van to go to some random neighborhood in Atlanta to pick up this dude's sister. And along the way, I find out that he's like, yeah, we're from New York, and Tisha and I drive up there and back like 2 or 3 times a year. They switch off driving. They drive that van. So they're like, in fact, we were going to be there soon anyway, so we might as well go see our family as well. I was like, oh, well, that's useful. So we go pick up Tisha. Tisha and Will sit in the front. They basically take out the middle bench seat. So I have like all this room in the back, and then there's the back bench seat. I basically am in the back of this van overnight. They're hauling up through a snowstorm all the way up the coast, switching off along the way however they normally switch off. Stopped 2 or 3 times. I said, I'll pay for all the gas, I'll pay for all your food, and so on. So literally there's like 1.5 feet of snow falling, and we pull in to her house. Meanwhile, I'm also checking like flights of like, maybe I can catch a flight that leaves in an hour through North Carolina. Like I was just looking at like, what are the fastest ways that I can get there along the way, like on my phone. And so ultimately none of that pans out. We just keep booking it, and they're going like 85 miles an hour on the highway through a snowstorm in the middle of the night to get to Connecticut. And I end up pulling into her driveway at, I believe it was like 11 a.m. after being in what took 15 hours from an Uber that I didn't pay him through the Uber app, by the way. Otherwise, like Uber wouldn't even calculate a price. It was that far. It wouldn't even give a number. I couldn't even pay him through the app if I wanted to. And so long story short, I show up, and it was kind of this whoa moment of, you just Ubered from Atlanta overnight. And so I knew that was going to go a long way towards showing that I'm serious about being with you and so on and so forth. So long story short, we're getting married this weekend. And that was a little over 3 years ago, of the infamous Uber ride from Atlanta. And that has since become a Hallmark story. So a couple principles that first of all, I hope you enjoyed that story. Second of all, there's a couple principles that are very applicable for when you really intend for a thing to happen, regardless of what the outside world tells you is a reasonable thing to expect or do. And not to be too cliche, but persistence and determination. There's one thing that's one of my biggest strengths is probably persistence. I would say it's probably my number one asset. It's probably why I'm reasonable at sales and business and so on, is just I want to make sure that I get my outcome no matter what. And so there was a moment, a rare moment, that I was sitting on a bench in the Atlanta airport, kind of out by like just some random bench. And the snow was falling, and I'm just like, I think I might be screwed. Like I might have to sleep in the airport tonight on like a bench, and like along with all the other thousands of people that are stranded in Atlanta. And I'm like, you know what? Here's what I decided at that time. I said, this story is not going to end with, and then I spent the weekend in Atlanta. Because otherwise, like, of course, the next day, Saturday, I'm not going to get like on the first flight out, because there's thousands of other people that are already on those flights, and like it's still snowing, and it was just like there was no chance. So I said, you know what, this story is not going to end with, and then I spent the weekend in Atlanta. Said I would much rather have this story go a completely crazy, adventurous route, because it's going to be a good story. Regardless, it's going to be a much better story than me giving up and just sitting there like any normal, rational person would do, is say, guess I'm not getting to Connecticut because of the snow, and then just calling it a day. So persistence, determination, and really making sure that you know that it's at least worth pursuing. And I wouldn't have been able to live with myself if I just sat there and did nothing. So the only way that I would have been able to live with myself is if I gave it absolutely every last solution that I could possibly think of. And that's what I did. And it just so happened to work. I got there almost a full day late, but I got there with this story that was now the leading story of my re-entry basically back into her life, into her family's life, and so on. And that just kind of left everybody's mouths just dropped open. And that went a long way of basically influencing the dynamic back to John's not such a bad guy after all, even like the slightest bit. And so I just wanted to share that story with you, because I personally find it entertaining, and of course I had to make a YouTube video sharing that story, but also the persistence and determination required to get anything that you want in life is enormous. And I will tell you that although I didn't do it for the actual ROI reason, because this is an entrepreneurial channel, I will tell you that now she does not have any other occupation aside from making sure that I'm able to focus 100% on my business, because that return on time, allowing me to not have to do all of the other things in our life and keep track of all the other stuff that life requires, and that's kind of her job. It allows me to be much more efficient, much more productive, and literally the ROI on that $1,200 Uber ride has literally been multiple millions of dollars. And so although I don't necessarily recommend you just go start blowing money on Uber rides, I will say that if you know I'll say your gut, in your heart, whatever it is, that there's an outcome that you know is at least worth getting in a random van with two random people in some random city and trusting them to drive you overnight without having any guarantees of actually living through it. There's something to be said for really leaning into pursuing what's really important to you. And I can promise you that if you just continue to lean in and find out, like, what is the solution? What's the solution? Even when it looks grim and awful and like you're ready to give up, there's always a solution. There's always a way to get there. I was prepared to start walking if that's what it took. I was prepared to start walking and freezing my ass off walking, because I knew I was going to at least make progress to where I was going, and that was all I was determined to do. So sometimes all you can do is walk, sometimes you can take a plane, sometimes you gotta Uber. My point is, whatever it is that's important to you, if it's really that important, you'll do whatever it takes and not stop when a reasonable person would stop. I would not consider myself a reasonable person in that capacity, especially when there's something that I know is absolutely at least worth me finding out if this is the direction that is really the right direction to go. And in my heart at the time, and still in my heart to this day, that is the best, greatest sale that I've ever made in terms of winning back somebody into my life that's very important to me, and literally the most important person in my life. So Melissa, if you're watching this, I love you, and I'm glad that I made that Uber ride. And if you're watching this on YouTube or anywhere else, I just wanted to let it serve as a story of what happens when you actually really truly commit to getting what you want. There's always a way, there's always a solution. And just wanted to share that story with you. So let me know in the comments what your favorite part was about this story, and make sure that you smash that like button and smash that subscribe button, because I put at least one video out like this every single week to help you get out of your own way, become a bulletproof entrepreneur, and create real freedom for yourself and everybody else in your life and business. So I will see you in the next video.